Okay, perfect. So welcome everyone to this session on farm cluster groups. I wanted to really welcome everyone and to say thank you to Tarja and Hannah and Sarah for putting the session together. We're going to be hearing from about 3 examples of farmer groups, and we're also going to be hearing from some of the farmers directly. And I guess in the context of all of the big changes that are happening right now, some discussion around the opportunities and ways of funding farmer networks will be key. So having said that, I'm going to hand over to Sarah, I think, to start the presentation.
Thanks, Ellen. Afternoon, everyone. My name's Sarah Robinson. I'm the Farming and Wildlife Officer for the Forest of Bowland AONB, and I'm also facilitator for the Pendle Hill Farmer Network, which I'm going to talk to you a bit about today. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. There we go. Okay. So to start with, I just wanted to give a very quick introduction to the Countryside Stewardship Facilitation Fund group funding, lots of words. This is the funding that funds our Pendle Hill group, and also the same funding which funds the groups that Hannah and Tarja have been involved in. There are other ways of forming cluster groups, which is kind of one of the things we wanted to talk about this afternoon. But in essence, so you know what we're talking about, the facilitation funding through Countryside Stewardship is funding for groups of farmers to come together for collective training events, whether they're workshops, talks, meetings, and the funding covers the time of the facilitator and the project management, and as well as the delivery of bringing in experts to deliver that training. And the subjects they're set out as part of your application, but they need to be around improving the agri-environmental delivery of the agreements in that local area. And some of them were set up with a much more specific NFM, that's natural flood management focus. And that was after the Boxing Day floods. So some of the groups have a real kind of floody flood protection focus as well. They started off being 5 years at the start of new Countryside Stewardship, and the last ones were 3 years. The one I run is 3 years long. The funding is the same. It relates to the number of members you have, £10,000 a year plus £500 per group member. So you can work out how much the budget will be before you start. They wanted at least 2,000 hectares of land in a contiguous landscape. Our farms around Pendle in the main are quite small, so that in order to get to our 2,000 hectares, we had 26 members to get to that amount. And you need to have set out a facilitation plan, what you want to do, and already have those farmers set up as part of the application process. So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about what we have done since we set up the Pendle Hill Farmer Network. It sits within the Pendle Hill Landscape Partnership Project, which is a heritage lottery 4-year programme running from 2018 to 22. It's funded by Countryside Stewardship, and the network itself was really brought together once we realised that this funding was available, and that we thought it would fit in very well with the Landscape Partnership as well. So we started in March 2018 with 26, I think, members to start with. We now have 29, and part of our facilitation plan was to deliver 6 events a year, to provide training, advice, to focus on the habitats that we had within our JCA, Joint Character Area, and related to the priorities of Countryside Stewardship in the Pendle Hill area. And one of the really good things is that's come out of it already is that it provides a really good crossover between the local farmers and the farming community and the Pendle Hill Landscape Partnership project itself. And because of the Pendle Hill Landscape Partnership, we have been able to put project delivery embedded into the farmer network, funded by the Landscape Partnership rather than the facilitation fund, which I'll probably keep saying only funds training activities, not delivery on the ground. So what have we been doing? In 2018, we focused on water quite a lot. We started off with Natural England talk on funding for clean and dirty water systems. We talked to Environment Agency, had a walk with them, talking about the new farming rules for water and buffer zones for nutrient additions to pasture. We went and visited, this was great, loved this, went on a bus, it was great fun, to Nethergill to look at their natural flood management measures. Had a practical rush management workshop, which was really, really popular. Predation control, similarly very popular, and finished off that year with a farmland birds workshop. And those two were both with Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust. In 2019, we expanded the type of things we were doing a little bit. We have a nest box project. So any of the farmer members who are interested in having an owl box in a barn or a series of small bird boxes were able to have those delivered to them, and they were made by volunteers working within the Landscape Partnership project. So that's kind of one of the first links between the two. We went up to North Sheep to look at machinery, another popular event. And the reason that we went there was because the main focus for 2019 was soil management. So we went to look at soil lifting kit and mold draining kit, that kind of thing, pieces of kit to reduce compaction. We went and visited the Yorkshire Dales National Park, Tarja and Hannah, and had a look at their payment for results pilot. One of the other things that we're really trying to do is pass on as much information as it becomes available about how schemes are going to change, with BPS going down a slope and elms coming up the slope. So we're trying to make sure that we can disseminate as much information about the future as possible. We also have, so the soil management, that was, again, really, really popular. I think every single member came to one of those. We were able to have a lovely sunny afternoon, as you can see in the pictures, even with a whiteboard, soil lifting kit. People were really interested. We were then able to get an alteration to the scheme and were able to fund some actual soil testing for each member, and then had that analysed, the nutrients analysed, and then each member was able to have half an hour with a soil scientist to go through what it meant for them on those individual fields. We did 6 fields per holding. So that was really, really popular, and the idea behind that was to try and really match and focus nutrient inputs to what was actually needed in those individual fields. The Traditional Boundary Project is another landscape partnership project within which we've been able to fund either a piece of hedging or a piece of walling on each member's farms. Yeah, and we always obviously give advice about what different types of funding are available, and also DEFRA have asked to come up and arrange meetings. And so the farmer network is a great network for us to use to put together meetings when DEFRA want to come and ask farmer kind of focus group meetings, farmer focus group meetings about what type of support they need post-Brexit. So that was 2019. 2020 so far, well, things have been a bit different this year. We did manage to have a boundary grant workshop very early on, and since lockdown we have moved on to Zoom, We've got a project looking at integrated parasite management. So this again is focusing worming and wormers to exactly when they're needed, rather than prophylactic treatment, which has environmental consequences and costs more money. And we've just started working with Becky from the Farm Carbon Toolkit, and tomorrow night we have our second Zoom about practical methods for carbon reduction on farm. And I think we're going to do some more Zoom, but we'll see. So within the Pendle Hill Landscape Partnership, we have a series of projects within which are really kind of farming related, and members of the network have been able to benefit from these in particular. We have the traditional boundary scheme, which I mentioned, that is funding a total of 6,000 metres of hedging and 1,000 metres of walling, split between the farmer members. We have a Meadows project, which began this year, and that has 11 meadows that we are enhancing for biodiversity, and 6 of those meadows are on network farms. What's a Hillworth project? This is a research project around valuing the environmental assets on members' farms, and the 3 case studies that have been used in that project are all network farmers, and Kathy Hopley, who's on this call, is leading a webinar about the Hillworth project on this time on Thursday. So you can find out some more about that then. The Summit project looked at improving footpaths and peat restoration on the hill itself. You can see here a lovely shiny new bridleway. So we've also been able to fund rights of way improvements within the network and within the project area. And we've also produced a series of, I think there's 8 different public information posters, which have helped, hopefully have helped in visitor management across the landscape partnership area. And of course, everything is reciprocal. So there are real benefits to the landscape partnership of having a farmer network and a group of farmers who we're getting to know a bit more and a bit more. And they're great for practical advice, a bit of help. They take stuff up the top of the hill for us when there's too much to carry. So practical help with projects has been great. They really support our visitor management, and they're a great sounding board as well. They really are, and they let us know if things are a good idea or not. They've also, one of them has provided some workshop space for our volunteers. They provide sites for our events. This is a hedging training course, but they've also provided things for the hedgerow competition and other events. And they really do help us build local support for the project, as well as being a sounding board. So I'm going to finish it in a sec, but just very quickly, we're going to come on to, I don't think I need that one. No. So we're going to come on to 2 other examples of farmer networks and what they've been up to. And then I think after that, we're going to see if we can get some views from the farmers themselves. So I think I should be going to Taria, perhaps?
I thought I was next, actually.
Okay, no, I'm not. I'm going to Hannah. Ah! We didn't rehearse that bit.
Right, I'll try and share my screen now. Oh, sorry, I'm going to have to start from the beginning. I'm skipping slides. Hi, so I'm Hannah Fawcett. I work for the Yorkshire Dales National Park as a farm conservation advisor. And for the last 3 years, I've been involved with the Loonsdale Facilitation Fund Group. This was a 3-year project that finished in March of this year, unfortunately timing itself with the coronavirus pandemic, so we had quite an untimely end to the project, which is a shame because it had been a really good 3-year project with a lot of involvement and a lot of keen engagement with the farmers. So we had 25 farmer members involved with the project, and we worked with some key partners, those being the Dales Farmer Network, the Loon Rivers Trust, and Paul Arkle, who's an independent farm consultant. And we had a very strong theme, a very strong focus on natural flood management, which stems from the back of the 2015 flooding events. So this is who we are. So we had some very big holdings and we had some very small holdings, and some of them were neighbours and some of them were out on a limb. They were all in the Western Dales, part of the Yorkshire Dales National Park, and sort of centred around the Sedbergh area. In the main, the majority were hill sheep enterprises with small suckler herds. So that sort of made up the majority of the farms, and they were all coming from a similar background in terms of their farming experience. So what did we do and how did we do it? Well, to start with, we had a steering group, and the steering group was made up of a handful of farmer members in addition to the key partners. And we got together, and myself as a facilitator, we got together twice yearly and devised a plan in terms of what events we wanted to host and what sort of direction we wanted to take the group. And that sort of was what we built on throughout the next 6 months. So the events that we hosted, we tried our best to get them out on farm because that is what we found was most successful in terms of the numbers that attended. And this was difficult throughout the year because obviously in the winter months, shorter days and pressures on farmers to go out feeding, etc., made it difficult. So where we could, we were out on farm, whether that would be an early evening event, they seemed to work well, or we did some lunchtime events as well. And in addition, in the winter months, we did host some meetings in the village hall, that sort of meeting as well, which were also well attended. But I think we definitely got the best turnouts when we were out on farm, when people got to look round other people's farms and see what was going on. Farmers love being nosy, as we all do, so that works well. And what we also really tried hard to do was make sure that it was a social event and made sure that we fed them and we had drinks. And that was really important to try and bring that social aspect to the group. We really felt strongly about that, and we got the farmers or the farmers' wives that wanted to do the catering. We let them take that on board, and that really created, I think, an extra dynamic in terms of the group. You know, it helped sort of bring everybody together. So yes, we hosted events and we brought in people. We brought in professionals. We brought in some very expensive but very good consultants talking about soil health and grassland. We also got some freebies. I work for the National Park, as I said, and we also convinced some of the woodland officers to come out and talk. We got some of the other farm officers out to talk. So it was a real nice mix of who delivered the events. We even got United Utilities out to talk on biosolids. You know, we had a full range of different things going on over the 3 years. And we also tried to, whilst our focus was a strong NFM focus, we also tried to ensure that we delivered, or we engaged the farmers with countryside stewardship and made sure that they were aware of what was available to them and also what was around the corner in terms of elms. And we really tried hard to promote that discussion and allow farmers, or to signpost farmers into how they could be involved in that discussion. And I think in some ways, because we're the National Park and we've got other, we can offer things outside the Facilitation Fund, that worked well. Because the Facilitation Fund was only able to offer group training, group events, we weren't able to offer the one-to-one advice through the Facilitation Fund. So in terms of the countryside stewardship, we were able to offer one-to-one advice outside the Facilitation Fund. We were very fortunate in that way. So we did assist farmers in their applications from hedgerow and boundary schemes right through to new native woodland creation, and we managed to help them through that, but that was not as part of the facilitation fund. So yes, we had a strong focus on NFM, and we spent a lot of time digging soils up, digging soil pits, looking at soil profiles, and that was where we got the most engagement in terms of the farmers. And we also did soil testing, and we had some really good soil workshops, and also looking at techniques and management in terms of improving soil health. So that was where we sort of started from. And then over the 3 years, we managed to bring in, we had other focused events on NFM features such as leaky woody dams and hedgerows, and how we can use those to manage water. So it was a really interesting 3 years, and something that I'm pleased that I was involved with. It wasn't without its trials and tribulations, but I think, and I would hope that the farmer members got something out of being part of it. And I've got Carol Moffat, who's going to speak in a little while as a farmer member and also a representative from the Farmer Network. But I think at the moment, that's all I'll say about Lonsdale, and I'll hand over to Tarrier to talk about Wensleydale.
Tarrier, you're still on. Oh,
right, sorry, my apologies, I've unmuted. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to give an overview of the Wensleydale Facilitation Fund Group, and there is overlap in terms of some of the things that we did, activities, but also the processes with what Sarah and Hannah have spoken about. So I'll try and not repeat myself, but I'll try and bring out some other points as well. After Storm Desmond, the Countryside Stewardship Facilitation Fund had an application round that was only available to those farmers who farmed in the northwest, and so that was the application round that we applied for in Wensleydale, and it was the same with Hannah's Lonsdale group, and there was another group at Swaledale which Carol Moffat was a facilitator for, and another group of Upper Wharfdale, and then Ribblesdale farmers. So we all were successful in that bidding round, and we all started a similar time. It was supposed to be March 2017. We actually got off the ground in May by the time the paperwork came through, and it was we were offered 3 years contracts and programs that we planned for 3 years, and we had to, as Hannah mentioned, we had to focus on natural flood management. So it was bringing together farmers that had a common interest in natural flood management, but we did include within our application a focus on other countryside stewardship outputs as well, in terms of biodiversity, landscape, historic environment, etc. And we had the benefit of the key partners that we set the group up with, who also sat on the steering group along with some of the farmers, and the Dales Farmer Network and the Yorkshire Rivers Trust, with myself and the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority, formed that steering group with those farmers. And that the big benefit of that as well then was that we also, when we did our planning, we didn't just do it in isolation. We worked with the Lonsdale group and Swaledale group and Upper Wharfdale group in particular. As Hannah mentioned, and Sarah as well, the most successful events were focused around soil management, aeration, so we had quite a few activities linked to that. So why the National Park works with farmers? You know, we own very little land in the park, and it's the greatest way we can influence management of the land is working in partnership with the people who actually own and farm the land as well. Just on the left here, we got a small group of farmers looking at some offline ponds, which are below a steep slope, which are collecting water to hold it and then slowly release it into some hedgerows that are being planted just a little bit lower down. And on the right here, we've got our farmers getting together, having a look at some of the opportunities they had for looking at where their carbon reductions can be made, which is what Sarah mentioned about working with Becky Wilson from the Carbon Farm Toolkit. So our fund group, we as a whole group met once a year, and that was an indoor meeting, usually in the winter, because that was the best time to try and get people who had a little bit of time. Our steering group was made up of 4 farmer representatives. Those did change a little bit throughout the time, which was good. 3 of them actually stayed on board throughout the whole process, and then one, Alistair, came on a little bit later, halfway through the process, and you'll hear from Alistair a little bit later on. And we have the Dales Farmer Network and the Yorkshire Dales Rivers Trust as the partnership within that steering group. And we met 2 to 3 times a year in person, and then we communicated with each other in between. And our group events, similar, were a combination of indoor talks and on-farm events, or getting in a bus or sharing transport to go and have a look at what people are doing in other dales and valleys. Sarah mentioned to this that we had the opportunity through this farmer group to input into the consultation for elms, and there has been other consultation processes where the farmers have had the opportunity to feed into that as well. And myself, along with Hannah and others, we've actually were invited to engage with some national and regional partnerships that are looking at natural flood management, so in conjunction, for example, with universities and that. So overall, over 3 years, we ran 18 events, and there's just a list of some of the activities that we got involved with or focused on. Managing rush encroachment is quite a hot topic in some of our parts of our area. So we took the opportunity as well, looking at how to manage rush better, was also to look at how rush management can actually be linked to managing land better for breeding waders. Because the Wensleydale part of the Yorkshire Dales, along with some other parts of the Dales, along with the Forest of Bowland, are key areas for breeding waders, some of the best breeding waded country in the country, along with the North Pennines. In terms of spin-offs that we were able to produce outside the facilitation fund because of the Yorkshire Dales National Park being involved, or the Rivers Trust. The Rivers Trust had some extra money through the Prince's Countryside Fund for producing natural flood management farm plans. So they put together a template, and they provided some on-site training with some of our farmers, and help them put together plans for the whole farm. We were able to, through the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority, we were able to endorse 23 countryside stewardship applications. These were mid-tier and higher tier, which enabled the farmers to have an extra 20% uplift on their score in these competitive application rounds. We're not entirely sure how much that was taken on board, as to whether, because of countryside stewardship funding maybe being underspent, whether it would have made a difference whether they had that 20% uplift or not. We actually don't know, but at least they had that opportunity. And it's that one-to-one advice that we managed to provide through the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority. So for the farmers involved with this group, we helped with 10 mid-tier and higher tier countryside stewardship applications. In addition to that, there'll be a lot of mid-tier applications which were just catchment sensitive farming applications focused on capital grants, but that runs on a slightly different programme, but it involves Hannah, for example. Like the Pendle Hill Partnership, the Pendle Hill area, we have got some extra money available for delivery on the ground. It's delivery focused on natural flood management, and the Environment Agency agreed a fund which is delivered by the Yorkshire Dales Rivers Trust. It's still running, and it's in the Bishopdale part of the catchment, and there's about £60,000 worth of money available for delivery of natural flood management measures on the ground. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen because we're going to use these slides for how do I stop? Oh, here we are at the top here. We're going to use these later on. So we're going to use this as an opportunity at this stage to bring in some of the farmers who are involved with the group so that they can share their views of what they felt worked or didn't work, And then we can move on to, I've got a couple of slides that summarise some of the lessons that we learned, i.e. the good and the bad and the ugly. And then it gives an opportunity for us all to have a discussion about going forward, if you're interested in forming a farmer cluster group, about the opportunities about going forward, either using facilitation fund money, but also there's lots of ways of doing it without having to use facilitation fund money.
Taria, shall we take questions that are in the chat now?
That's good. So is Kathy able to?
Yeah, I'll do that, shall I? So we've had a few questions during Sarah's presentation. First one, straightforward one, Sarah, was about is the facilitation fund available outside of England?
Facilitation funding is available everywhere that countryside stewardship is, so I would say probably not. So England only.
Okay. And a couple of questions around the soil testing. Did the facilitation fund pay for it? And how did you get the researchers involved? And did the farmers find that element of it useful?
Okay, so yes, the facilitation fund did pay for the soil testing, 6 fields for each member, as well as 3 sessions with the soil scientist. And we had that paid for because of the positive impact we were hoping that it would have on natural flood management and on invertebrate biodiversity. And the soil scientist who was involved was actually recommended to us by one of our farmer members. And so well used to working with farmers in the area, knows the area, and so was kind of known and respected by the group anyway. And yes, they found it incredibly useful. We've never had such a massive turnout or as much positive feedback. What they really liked was the process of being able to have something paid for that they were really interested in, and then having that little bit of time. We had a whole day where the poor guy James was just sat there. It was like one person coming and then the next person coming. So over the course of a day, he saw all the farmers' members and went through the results and what those results meant to those individual fields. So yeah, they found it really helpful. And the one overriding thing that I think probably 5 or 6 members said was, "Blimey, Sarah, I've been putting on this 20-10-10 all this time. I didn't need to. So I've saved some money." And, you know, from our perspective of saving nutrients to not go on to land where it's not needed is just, so it's one of those brilliant win-wins, you know, financial and environmental. So yeah, it was great.
We did something similar. Ours was slightly different in that we offered them 5 soil samples and we ran it as a group discussion. So that in itself was really interesting because everybody got to see everybody else's results, and that did promote a lot of good discussion about nutrient management.
Yeah, that's
and the last question was around the actual kind of running of the scheme. Both of these came from Hammond Field, who was saying, "I hear there are questions with reimbursement of payments," so we can gloss over that one fairly quickly, but yes, there are. Her other question was about the time limited nature of these networks when they're funded through the facilitation fund. You know, are there plans to continue those networks? And how do the farmers, you know, feel about them being time limited? Is there options for them to be more involved, to keep them moving? And if you want to answer that, or if you think that's going to be covered by the next bit.
I think we're hoping to talk about that a bit more coming up, Kathy. Yeah, yeah, it is an issue, definitely. So yeah, that's what we're hoping that we can explore in this group in later on.
Okay, brilliant. I shall leave it there then.
Okay, what we're going to do now is if we can bring in Carol Moffat, who was in the Loonsdale group as a farmer member. But Carol, you can also share your experiences from the Loonsdale group as well, can't you? And also working for the Farmer Network with grassroots clubs. There's Alistair from the Wensleydale group. And then Sarah, I don't know if you want to introduce, if you could introduce the Pendle Hill farmers.
Certainly. We have Thomas Binns on the call, and two of my other, well, Matt Whitwell is trying to join, but has been having a few issues with the weather and the Wi-Fi.
Would you be able to start, Carol or Alistair? Would that work?
Yeah. I'm Carol Moffat. I work as a coordinator and project manager for the Farmer Network. We operate in both Cumbria and the Yorkshire Dales. I've been lucky enough to be part of the Loonsville Facilitation Fund group with Hannah, attending most of the events and meetings and things throughout the 3-year project. It's been, like Hannah says, it's been very interactive. We all know each other. We're all quite comfortable sort of talking about various things within the group. Obviously, Hannah's had a great part in sort of facilitating that and choosing the right places to go to do meetings, which has been great. We've had a great social element to it as well afterwards, whilst we've been having something to eat and drink. Particularly when we've been at the People's Hall, where one of the farmers' wives, great cooking was enjoyed after a very cold farm walk. We've all learned quite a lot. Particularly, we had a huge focus on sort of soil management and nutrient management to sort of go ahead with that, leading on to sort of rush management as well, which is a big problem for us in the sort of Sedbergh, Garsdale, Bent area. We found that useful basically because when we've done these soil samples, we were able to kind of find out, you know, what was needed to be applied. And like we said before, we've been using the 2010-10 and we hadn't really needed to. So it's had great implications on saving money, just being a little bit more aware of what us as farmers are doing in terms of nutrient management, and how that has a role in absorbing, you know, flood water, because we were very badly affected during Storm Desmond, where our neighbour actually had a huge landslide, and we thought, well, what can we do to sort of mitigate that, really? So yeah, it's been really useful. Like Hannah said, I think the farm walks help because you kind of get around and see what other farmers are doing as well. So that has a good hook. Yeah.
Do you want to come in at this stage, Alistair, about some of the good and the bad and the ugly?
Yes, I think if I've managed to master unmute. Can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry, quick background. Alistair Dinsdale, I farm in Wensleydale in the national parks. We farm dairy, beef and sheep on some fairly challenging terrain from the valley bottom to the valley top. Mixed sort of habitat. I have a special interest in ground nesting birds and have had for many, many years. The group I felt was very, very useful. The group structure was very useful. What do you need to do? You need to have strong leadership. The groups that I've been involved with all over the years, they're fine when you have good leadership and financing from them. They're fine. Once they start and fall back in farmers' hands and they try to manage them, they die their death. The success of this group was down to its facilitators, the Tarrier and our colleagues, getting people to the meetings, providing a subject which was interesting, and the social aspect of it was brilliant because it was a sharing of good practice. People on the walks, people would see and would discuss with each of the colleagues and neighbours what they felt, they thought. They'd talk things through, the soil nutrient ones and the we're all relearning for a lot of us. People had forgotten about soil health and its impact. From the group, there was a lot. It became apparent that a lot of the farmer interest was this. One of them, somebody took by, said he had an overriding desire to produce, to farm, to produce food. And it was when we came to analyse it and talk about it that we all, in a changing landscape, we all have these special areas, and it's a case of deciding which areas fit into these schemes or which habitat is ideal. And the rush management one was a classic example. We have stewardship options which talk about bird habitat, where in my opinion don't actually match the requirements of the birds. And so we came to this talk about how we can manage areas of this rush management, which provided, in my opinion, better facilities for the birds in terms of, and also had the spin-off of better grass, better hay to produce it. It's a double. It isn't all one thing or the other. It's a more rounded thing about how do we achieve the objectives of all these different things, and yet still do what the farm wants to do. He doesn't want to just build his walls and look after birds. He wants to farm, but he wants to do it all together. It was amazing how many, when it came together, how many people are practicing this and not shouting about it, really. It happens naturally. They know where the birds are, they know where the habitat is, the protect areas. We get a lot of bad press about you know, we don't care, and the more people I ask about the birds and the habitat, the more people share their experience. Say, well, I've got such and such here, and I've watched that there. I think this was an opportunity for people to sort of talk and discuss what they had, and also look at ways of improving that environment, with consideration for all these other aspects of it. The flood management aspect of it, I personally initially had some grave doubts about, you know, the small measures of leaky dams, and I still probably have. My feeling was that if you could improve the water bearing content of every acre of land, you were going to influence it more than having you know, a few areas of oxbows or things like that. And I think that was when this, you know, we looked at soil aeration and soil drainage and such like. It's a double win situation. You open up the soil, it absorbs more material, it lets all the life in the soil work on it. In terms, we get better grass for the sheep and better and improved habitat all around. We get more insects in the soil for the birds which penetrate the soil for the feeding. It's all tied up together, and I think that needs to be one of the focuses more of where we go forward into Elms, that not only are we providing that habitat, we're also doing it in a round way, which is that we don't either do environmental or agricultural. It's all about a rounded agriculture. Terry mentioned, you know, she did mention, you know, that was part of it. The social aspect of it was very, very good. It brings back to people, like-minded people together, in opportunities even more than a one-to-one basis, because in the background of these discussions or collections, people are rolling off their ideas against each other, and I felt that it was a very good value for money for delivering advice and information, and I would be sad to see the group come to an end. And for the time being, I think, you know, that you know, that we go forward.
We can look at that when we'll discuss that when we look at the way forward that we're looking at towards the end, Alistair. Thanks for that. Sarah's saying that Matt's managed to join us, but he's struggling with his internet. So I don't know, Matt, whether you're able to talk to us or not. So it's Matt Whitwell, is it, from Pendle area? I don't know if you can hear me, Matt. So it's possible. I don't know if I can see you on here, actually. Can you see Matt on here, Sarah?
Yeah, he's using his wife's account, so he's Hazel this afternoon. But Matt, if you can't, if you're struggling, I was wondering, Thomas, if you'd got any comments that you'd like to make about the Pendle group or farmer facilitation groups in general.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, perhaps obviously Matt would have been ideal to update the chat on his involvement with the network. I've got to say, and I've got to confess, my actual hands-on involvement has probably been pretty sparse, such as the busy lives that some of us tend to lead, and my participation in some of the practical stuff has been limited. But if I can just make one or two observations, and I think Alistair touched on it in his last comment. I think the areas of interest seem to have been around this: how can I farm better within an environmental sort of context? And that productive farming is a real strong driver for farmers to come together and improve their farming lot. And I think, as we quite clearly, the facilitation groups have been about for a few years, but as Elms starts to come and we see more of its development, I think this theme of productive farming, not producing necessarily more, but what we do, doing it better, will come to the fore. And I think you know, the experiment through the facilitation groups have been that it's been able to help focus that, you know, the success of all three groups sounds to have been around this: what can farmers get out of it in terms of their productive, improving their productivity on the farm. So I think that's a real good plus. And I think the other observation is about what comes next. And I think the only constant perhaps around all these areas is that the constant is the farmer. And I think you know, we've had a number of groups over the years in our AONB, some wider groupings, some smaller groupings. All have engaged farmers pretty well, and I think farmers are pretty comfortable at getting engaged with things locally, with local advice, local knowledge, people that aren't there always judging, and it allows things to flow and have flexibility. And I think the concept of facilitation groups, clusters, call them what you will, I think is one that's now sort of resonating in I'll confess to wearing an NFU political sort of hat here, but certainly some of the national conversations I'm picking up, you know, facilitation of farming and farmers at a grassroots level is pretty well established in the conversation point. It's just at what level that intervention will come at some future date. So I think, you know, when somebody writes up about the facilitation group, I think there'll be an awful amount of positivity from a farmer perspective. I mean, I leave aside the question of value for money and this, that, and the admin and the you know, turning people's hair white, people not turning up to meet it. You know, I leave all that aside. But I think the concept's right. And I think as we get challenged going forward, there'll be more and more demand for people to understand how to produce better, be more productive on farm, particularly as we pick up the carbon agenda going forward. That's me done.
Brilliant. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Thomas. So yeah, just picking up on carbon ever so quickly. Tomorrow evening is our October meeting with the Pendle Hill Farmer Network, and we've got Becky from the Farmer Carbon Toolkit. I get those words in the wrong order. Talking about practical implementation of carbon reduction and sequestration projects on farm. So if anybody wants to come to that, just drop me a line in the chat and I'll send you we'll have a special open meeting and I'll send you the Zoom link. So I think I'm going to pass back to Taria now.
So, Matt, I don't know whether you can contribute or not, but I can carry on with, I've got a few slides here about some of the lessons that we learned. And you can obviously join us, you know, as and when you can get your connection to work. So, unless I hear from you, Matt, shall I carry on? Okay, what I'll do is I'm going to share my screen now. Right, so what I've put together here on a couple of slides is what we learned actually from all the groups in the Dales, plus Sarah's put some input. They're obviously still part of the way through with their fund. So some of these lessons learned are quite specific to the facilitation fund process, which is run by the RPA now and was run by Natural England before. So it does have some constraints, and I noticed in the chat there's a few questions linked to this. But some of these lessons learned are definitely relevant to farmer cluster groups in general. And I suppose one first point is I actually don't like the name facilitation fund group personally. I much prefer the term farmer cluster. I think it's a lot more friendly. I don't know what people think about that, but we can have that as part of the general debate. So I'll start off with some strengths and opportunities, do a bit of a sandwich, do the warts in the middle. So a few people have mentioned this already. It's this peer learning. We found that the majority of things that worked really well was where one or two of the farmers actually hosted the events on their own farms, and they kind of took the lead on, you know, sharing their experiences, and that really made a big difference. But also in terms of trying to get people to attend events, quite often we got better numbers attending if their friends actually persuaded them rather than we did. Social aspects already been mentioned. Good range of events. It's a real good opportunity to run events because of the fact that we've got these links to other organisations, and we've potentially got links to consultants as well that might be out of the reach in terms of time or money availability for farmers. And this joint delivery that we did with lots of other groups. Influencing elms, we still got the opportunity to do that, and that's really important. We'll pick up on that a little bit later. And then we had the luxury of these existing partnerships that were already working in the area, and these are the ones that made a big difference to the success of how our groups fared. Now, Thomas alluded to this about administration, cost and time, and that has been a big challenge actually for all facilitation groups, partly because it was run under a joint EU DEFRA programme, and that they had their restrictions on how they managed it and what money was allowed to be spent on. But I don't know whether they just struggle to understand how difficult it is to work with farmers, and in particular the fact that farmers are available at different times throughout the year across the country. But we just found it quite inflexible. It took quite a lot of time to change programs or get amendments and changes made, and so cluster groups could definitely be run a lot cheaper in a different way if it wasn't constrained by the processes that the facilitation fund process currently has. Lack of delivery opportunity within the budget was a really big bugbear for some of our members and our steering group members. That really got to them a little bit, you know, about the fact that we had to then spend time and effort to try and find different ways of finding money to deliver. The lack of follow-up one-to-one support, which wasn't available through the facilitation fund, was definitely a limitation. But fortunately, as we all have mentioned, that we found ways of delivering this through existing partnerships. And this could be an issue if farmers actually perhaps not within a protected area such as a national park or an AONB, they might not have this same support network available to them that our farmers have got. You know, and there will be parts of the country where there isn't necessarily other partnerships who could provide this one-to-one support and the extra delivery money. I mentioned this before about the fact that it wasn't one size fits all the way they set the fund up. You know, farmers farming down in Norfolk has got completely different timescales throughout the farming year than we have, say, up in the uplands. And we found that the fact they were working to calendar years and financial years is very inflexible about the whole processes of reporting or delivering events. We found it a limitation focusing on natural flood management. And we found at the end of the 3 years, we were well underspent. So benefits of group work. This is really pertinent to our discussions now, because we felt, and I think a few people have already mentioned this, that there's definitely something about cluster groups that works. And the farmers who join them obviously have to find the time and motivation to join these groups, and there's got to be something that works for them. But it really does, for those farmers that participate, they are finding that it makes a big difference. And so these are some of the benefits that we found for our experiences. And then at the bottom I've added about the fact this is going to be quite key for those farmers who want to consider ELMS, because Basic Payment Scheme and Countryside Stewardship money is being redirected into this new environmental agri-environment scheme called ELMS, and it's a 3-tier structure. All farmers can apply for the first tier, but once you start looking for the second tier, they're looking for group working. They're looking for delivery across more than one farm holding. And so a cluster group is an ideal way potentially of you being able to partly look at tier 2, but also you'll get extra bonus points in terms of how the scoring is likely to be for tier 2. And tier 3, they're looking at kind of landscape scale projects, potentially that might be delivered by farmers in conjunction with partners such as the Environment Agency or National Parks, AONBs, Wildlife Trusts, etc., river trusts. About the trusted facilitator, I've got a few things here. Yeah, that's it. So some of the feedback that we had about what was important about a facilitator. Now the facilitator, in the case of these 3 groups that we've spoken about, actually, I know Hannah and Carol, for example, Swaledale are farmers, but they weren't farmer members of their own groups, if that makes sense. But there are other cluster groups around the country who get together and they nominate a farmer to be a lead facilitator. So it does work, and it can work. And as Alistair alluded to, it's who that person is and their strength and the support that they get from the steering group. And it's quite challenging this if you're from an organisation like the National Park or say RSPB, etc. Is that we've got to be really careful not to bring our politics or our agendas to that group. We've got to be truly independent and free of that baggage. And that's possibly why sometimes for some groups they'd rather have a facilitator who isn't a farmer from the group because of the local politics perhaps not being brought into it. And it takes a long while to build up trust and enable effective group working. And I think that was one of the challenges about running just a 3-year programme with the funding that we had. Some of the facilitating groups got money for 5 years. And from feedback that we've had from some of those groups, it took about 2 or 3 years before they actually got to a stage where the farmer members within the groups, actually had an idea of where they could go and what they could do. So it's that's something that's worth thinking about if you're setting up a new group or taking a group forward, is about not trying to deliver too quickly or to try to get, to move too quickly on this. And then just a few top tips about what we found worked in trying to get bums on seats, because sometimes it was quite hard work at certain times of year when there was demands, such as sheep sales, etc., about how to get people to events, because some of the events we had to run at certain times of the year, and other times we were able to be more flexible. I think that's my last slide. Oh, actually, I'll bring this in now. I was going to bring it at the end, but I think I'll bring it in now before the general discussion. This is a really useful website. It's a national website hosted by the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust. And on there are a few case studies, including ours, but there's case studies from all over the country. And some of these farmer cluster groups have been formed in completely different ways, but they've got some very useful guides about how to set a group up and how they've learned how things work. But they've also got some top tips about doing certain surveys, for example, and what funding is available. And you can sign up to a newsletter, an e-newsletter. So I'm going to stop sharing now And Sarah, are you happy to kind of coordinate the discussion?
Certainly. I was just going to go to Kathy and see if there were any other questions on the chat, because some discussion might come for that, perhaps.
I think we've covered them. So Dusty's put in, Dusty Rhodes' Catchment Sensitive Farming Network has put in a reference about rush management. And Jan was just asking about extension funds, which I think we've covered in terms of countryside stewardship. So yeah, I guess if people want to raise any other issues, you know, either wave your hand at me or put your reaction button on, or raise your hand on the participant list to let us know that you'd like to ask something of Sarah or Taria or Hannah, or indeed of any of the farmers that have had chance to speak. And we'll see if we can kind of field the questions in an open chat now.
Kathy, I just wondered if Carol could talk a little bit about her experiences in the farmer network, running the farm cluster groups, which are sort of similar but a different way of the farm group working.
Yeah, sure, go on.
Yeah, so the farmer network have funding from the Prince's Countryside Fund to hold small, what we call grassroots clubs. So we've got about 6 operating over the Yorkshire Dales and Cumbria. I run 2 within that. One group is actually in Wensleydale, where we're doing a bit of a grassland trial. We're going to looking at production, what grass layers are the most productive, what's the best way to sow new grasses into the ground, and things like that. It's been very farmer led. The guys, I think there's about 6 of them that are the core kind of group who've kind of driven it forward. We're very active on looking at the inputs into that as well, so fertilizers, the sprays, and what that aspect has on the environment as well. So going back to what Thomas said earlier about, you know, trying to drive production and perhaps sort of save on feed bills, that sort of thing. We've been monitoring all the costs of that, going in and the sort of production of the grasses. So we've been doing soil samples, grassland samples and silage samples, where we've all sort of met, I think, about 6 times per year. Obviously it's been a little bit different this year where we've had Zoom meetings, but it's all in all been really successful. And like I said, it is very farmer led. It's they've driven it. I've just sort of put the meetings together, really. The other group I have is actually purely for ladies around the Sedbergh area, where we sort of share ideas. We do lots of farm walks, where different kind of topics come up during that time. Again, we're very lucky that one of the ladies in the group is a vet, so we're able to sort of talk about animal health things, as well as sort of environmental things such as the countryside stewardship, where we've all sort of shared our experiences. We're putting applications together as well. We're a little bit more different in the fact that I'm sort of a part of that group as well as me sort of facilitating it. So again, it was very much thought of from a couple of our sort of more prominent ladies within the farmer network who said, look, it's great, it's all these meetings, but it's all men that come. So we thought we'd try a ladies group. It's been very successful, where we get about 20 ladies involved in all the meetings. So again, we do about 6 or 8 meetings per year, depending on what topics kind of arise from that. Yeah, and again, it's the farmer participation that drives it, because we've given them ownership of these groups. They're able to kind of drive it forward to what topics they want to discuss. Going forward, we kind of, funding is an issue. We've discussed the kind of maybe a subscription to these groups, or perhaps sort of having sponsors to fund the meetings. So yeah, it's a different way of looking at it compared to the facilitation fund, because we don't have a driven focus on what the meeting should be about. And that's the same with the other 4 groups that are operating as well. So, yeah.
Thanks, Carol. That was really useful.
No problem.
So Terry just pointed out that Ali Burkett asked a question about the soil. I don't know if you want to ask that question, Ali. Are you there?
Oh, it's a surprise when your name suddenly comes up. I was interested. I was interested in the discussion about the soil nutrient results, and the fact that when soil scientists shared results, lots of them were a surprise to the farmers. I was just curious, really, would you say the majority of farmers were surprised by the results, or in the majority of cases, did results agree with farmers' prior assessments of the land? I'd love any reports that you have, by the way, on that kind of stuff.
Some feedback that we got was, I'll just try to remember his name from SAT Consulting, Hannah, Ian Cairns, that was it. Ian Cairns is a farmer, and he did some soil sample discussions with our farmers. And the one thing he said, and I think also we had the same from the gentleman down, Charlie Morgan from Wales, said a lot of farmers pay for soil sampling, and now under the new farming rules for water, they're going to have to soil sample every 5 years. But from their experience, it's only a small minority of farmers that actually do something with those results and look at them and try to work out how to use them. A lot of them just put them in a drawer. I don't know if you'd concur with that.
Yeah, and I also think it's worth saying that a lot of the some of the big names that are selling fertilizer, etc., are also paying farmers. You know, you can get some free soil samples through them. But yeah, I think generally, and as we've also found with catchment sensitive farming, yeah, a lot of farmers will have these reports, have these soil samples taken, and aren't always taking it on board. But I think more and more, you know, I think especially as the message gets driven, and also with finances as well, it's I think we are seeing more responsible use of fertilizers, definitely.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
As well, you know, because obviously it can add up to quite a financial saving as well. And I think, as Rachel's just said on the chat, I think the key thing is having the information, but also somebody to translate that information for you in a practical and understandable, easy to understand way. And so Ian Cairns worked with Taria and Hannah. We used a guy called James Bretherton. Ian did our rush management days though, so that's another good thing about facilitation groups, is that you'll get to know your other facilitators and swap tips on really good specialists to bring in, and so that can also be really helpful to know who works well with groups of farmers. I would say my answer would be about kind of half and half in terms of some of our guys, and Matt, who's had to drop off the call, I would put in the category. He's really on his soil health, and to the extent that he said to me, I don't need you to do this for me, Sarah, because I've already got all mine done, and I look at them and I'm working with a soil scientist and I'm on it, so it's fine, use the money elsewhere. So some of them are, and some of them less so, but with input prices going up, they're realizing that it's more important as time goes on. And also, you know, we're talking about elms and water quality and payment for public goods. It's kind of all part of the same thing. So yeah, I think people are getting more tuned into it.
What do you think, Alistair, on that one?
Yeah, I think all of what you said is right. There's varying degrees of use of. It depends on the extent of your farming activities, whether you're intensive or very, 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 very extensive. the implications for soil test on a very, very high out farm with very little in-by land, it's a little less relevance. What I was thinking while the discussions were going on was, I'm sort of the bottom of Wensleydale at the park, and over the last few years, I've noticed the number of lime wagons passing here has quadrupled. It was non-existent at one time, but since these schemes have been going, and this includes the in our groups and Carol's groups, the number of people that are liming, which hadn't done for 20 or 30 years back to the subsidised period, and that the liming of these soils and is vitally important for a lot of the rush management and for the outputs of the fertiliser doesn't work if the acidity is not right. So I'm sure that it's had a massive benefit to the upland farming thing, because people it was an input that they didn't notice they needed, so they didn't spend it. And I think it's really highlighted. We used to get loads of free advice from various MAF and things like that, which dried up and disappeared. And there's a generation growing up without this basic knowledge, or specialist knowledge, which was brought back by this group. So that's commendable, really. Thank you.
Can I field another question? So Chris Turner is just asking a question about COVID. Do you want to ask that, Chris?
Yeah, sorry, I need to unmute myself. Yeah, I'm working with a few facilitation groups that got funded this January, and we barely got going before the COVID restrictions hit, and so I just wondered whether any of you had top tips on getting people online. I found a bit of a mixture. Some can get on, some can't. And I don't want to leave half the farmers out in the cold because they don't have computer access.
Okay, so we've done, hi Chris.
Hi there.
We've had, I would say, so we have 29 members, and our average turnout in a face-to-face meeting would be 50%. And we have had 2 Zoom meetings to date, one on parasite management and one on carbon, and we had 5 members to the first one and 6 to the second one. So and we have done I'm really fortunate. I've got an amazing colleague, Helen, who does admin support for the group, and so between us, we've made sure that before each Zoom that we're phoning everyone, making sure that they're comfortable. Helen also put together a step-by-step guide to getting onto Zoom, just with screenshots and pictures, and that helped a couple of people. So it is difficult, Chris, and it's a bit yeah. It's a horrible moment at about 5 to 7 when there's just you and nobody else, and you're thinking, oh my goodness me. So numbers are down, yes, but on the other hand, I'll share one little anecdote with you from one of our members who's one of the older members of the group, and Helen helped him get online and went through everything with him, and then he emailed her the following day to give his thanks, because he said, I'm 83. It's sort of one of those conversations. I'm 83 now, and my family have been trying to get me onto Zoom since the start of lockdown, and I assumed that I wouldn't be able to do it. So I just want to say thank you for making me realise that I can. And so he was part in his family Zoom. So that's quite cool. So yeah, it's tough, and I'm now wondering whether we can do small outdoor group sessions, visiting other farms if we travel separately, offer a slightly different food offering in terms of stuff that's been pre-packed somewhere. So I'm wondering about that, because yeah, it's not as easy as meeting on farm in person.
No, I kind of get that, and I think that there's Having said that, I think there's really good opportunities. So you've got Becky Wilson coming tomorrow. Well, she hasn't got to drive all the way from Cornwall, and we managed to do our first online with Becky Wilson, and got 6 farmers to our first one. And then we did another one last week with Stephen Briggs, a farmer from Cambridgeshire, talking about agroforestry, and we got 15. So we're getting an increase, and I do think there's potential for getting some really good speakers from not just the UK, but from other places. You know, it's our sort of window into the world. If we can get over the barriers of getting people connected with rotten Wi-Fi, rotten internet connection, no broadband, etc. And I can't help but feeling that this would be a better use of HS2 money to get people connected. And what a great way of getting farmers connected to new markets, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks, Chris. I'm just going to try and bring a couple of other people in who've been wanting to speak, because we're running close to time now. So, Thomas, did you have something you wanted to say when we were talking about soils?
Yes, I think Alistair's observation is pretty astute in terms of the lime wagon. And I think this is something that particularly the next wave of elms or elms needs to consider. Because as farmers, in the past, as we all entered into environmental schemes, one of the clauses was, thou shalt not lime, thou shalt not interfere with the indexes in the soil. And in fact, you've got to let them run down. And I think that's been the mantra for a lot of upland farmers, certainly upland farmers, for many, many years. And I think we've started to see, when HLS ran out and people weren't getting rollovers to the classic schemes, CS has come along, and there's not a lot of offering in there for some upland farmers, and the uptake's been pretty poor. And I think Alice's observation of that lime wagon going back up the hill is absolutely correct, because people have started to think about farming. And I think as BPS is wound out, give it another dose of thinking around about how we're going to maintain income, or what the income stream is going to look like now. And I think the first port of call for a lot of farmers will be to actually think, well, we'll have to go back and start and try and farm again. So I think the significance of interest in soil sampling and soil structure and productivity, I think, shouldn't go under the radar, because I think farmers are starting to tune into how do we get our way out of what looks like a looming crisis once BPS is stripped away from the equation. So elms has to be absolutely spot on in terms of the reward that it gives farmers to keep them engaged in a process that they've been well and truly engaged in, but let down through bureaucracy and a bad scheme and a bad experience. So I think that there's a lot hangs on how well elms is developed, how well it is funded, and how bureaucratic it becomes. Because I think there's a big challenge for upland farming with regards to, well, you know the score, but it's a real challenge. It's not a tweak of a regime change. This is wholesale regime change. Sorry, I got off the soapbox. Sorry.
No, it's fine. And again, plug in the session we've got on tomorrow, Thursday at 1:30, looking at some of those issues around the new schemes and payments for upland farmers. Carol, did you have something else you wanted to add before we finish? Oh, you're still on mute.
Sort of, in reply to Chris, really, about the Zoom meetings, we hold them on a regular basis with the Farmer Network, a couple of times a month. And we get about, between 15 and 30 farmers on those calls. It does sort of come down to your broadband connection. But another thing we sort of do is we record those meetings and we edit them down so they kind of condenses the kind of flow of the meeting, and put them onto YouTube so farmers can keep up to date that way as well. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Carol. Carol, there was a question on the chat from Kate about alternative funding. I just wondered if you could answer that one in terms of a non-facilitation funded network and how that works.
Yeah, so currently our PCF funding has run out, and we are sort of using a bit of the what we call our core funds to run those meetings at the moment. And we have approached our farmers to see if they would subscribe maybe £5 towards the meeting costs. Maybe that you know, sometimes it's mainly sort of down to food really and a bit of my time. And you know, the farmers are quite happy to sort of put that forward at the moment. So there are ways in which we got round it. We are also very lucky that we work very closely with Cars Billington, and they fund quite a lot of the meeting. They'll fund some of the food, a bit of my time, as well as sort of direct sponsorship really. And our local vets also help out towards the food, because we, you know, it's mainly their clients that are attending the meetings. So there are ways round it. It's just little bit difficult at the moment with the COVID restrictions. So it's quite easy just to do some Zoom calls, which are relatively cheap to run. It's not for everybody, but yeah, there are ways round it, I suppose.
Thanks. And I think there's probably going to be some discussion about that as well, in terms of the new environmental land management in the third tier, needing cooperation and collaboration between farmers, that having some kind of network set up, some sort of cluster where farmers can plan together and work together on their sort of landscape scale work, then, you know, that's important to still have those conversations going. So I would imagine it would be something that would be supported through that scheme in the way that this one has been. So let's hope that comes to the fore early enough before everything collapses and we have to start again. I think we're going to have to finish, but I just wondered if Sarah or Taria or Hannah had anything you want to sort of round up with.
No, I just really wanted to say thank you very much to everyone for coming. I think it's been a really good discussion and really quite thought-provoking in terms of, yeah, where do we go next? And I'm kind of aware that we don't actually have the answer to that question. Both Taria and Hannah have come to the end of their groups, and I'm looking for an extension at the moment. And so, yeah, it's something that we're all thinking about. Maybe subscription, maybe sponsorship, something like that. But yeah, that's it'd be nice to have more time to talk about that a bit more. But yeah, thank you, everybody.
Okay. I don't know if Ellen's still there, if she wants to just finish up.
Just a thank you really for all of the contributions, and yeah, we hope you all enjoyed the session, and we've recorded it so it'll be online shortly if you want to refer to it. So yeah, thank you very much everyone.